When empty land is paved over with concrete, capital flows follow. In fast-paced real estate markets, sudden value spikes generate sharp incentives for fraud. Surat has become a primary battleground for these interests. It's a city where expanding industrial zones are constantly encroaching on traditional agricultural plots. This legal petition, known as a dava arji, was filed in a Surat court. It documents a dispute over a plot in village Lodvi between a buyer named Galabai and a seller named Karbubai. What started as a standard agreement between these two men in 2010 would eventually spiral into a legal conflict spanning 14 years. In May 2010, the parties signed a sodachitti, an informal agreement to sell. The price for the agricultural land was fixed at 10,51,000 rupees. To lock in the deal, the buyer paid a significant cash deposit of 3,51,000 rupees. Trust was the bedrock of this initial stage. After the payment, the seller handed over actual physical possession of the soil. The buyer solidified his claim by moving onto the property. He built a cattle shed, known as a tabello, and began actively farming the land. However, a bureaucratic hurdle remained. The final deed could not be legally registered until the Revenue Department processed a block separation to formally divide the property titles. Maintaining a physical structure on the land gave the buyer a false sense of security. He believed his presence on the dirt was enough, which obscured the danger of holding an unregistered deed. Years passed as the seller blamed co-owners and government red tape for the delayed separation. A decade of waiting began to feel like the status quo. The buyer remained patient, even helping the seller fight disputes in the revenue courts just to clear the title so the sale could be finalized. By 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought government offices to a standstill. It provided a legitimate justification for even more years of delay. After 10 years of hearing that a resolution was imminent, the buyer had been conditioned to wait. He had no reason to suspect the trust he had built was being undermined. In May 2023, with the title process seemingly entering its final stages, the buyer made another payment of 3,51,000 rupees to the seller. But shortly after this payment, the seller stopped responding. Calls went unanswered, and the seller effectively vanished. Suspicious of the sudden silence, the buyer went to the revenue office to investigate the status of the land records himself. The records revealed a hidden transaction. On February 22, 2024, the seller had secretly registered and sold the exact same land to a completely different buyer. The motive was simple math. The land that was worth 10.5 lakhs in 2010 was resold for 33.3 lakhs in 2024. Over 14 years, the land's value had tripled. That equity was enough to make the seller abandon a decade-long agreement and opt for a higher bidder. The buyer immediately filed this civil suit to freeze the property, seeking to stop any further development or sales. His primary demand is for the court to cancel the 2024 deed and legally compel the seller to honor the original 2010 contract. If the land cannot be recovered, he is demanding 22 lakh rupees in damages, plus an 18% interest penalty. He is also seeking an injunction to protect his cattle shed, fearing the new buyer will attempt to clear the land. This case forces a collision between two types of evidence: the physical reality of the man living on the land and the digital record of the man who holds the new registration. This dispute reflects a systemic vulnerability in the real estate market that affects thousands of buyers. Informal agreements to sell are common, but they offer very little protection if a seller decides to act in bad faith years later. Until a final sale deed is officially registered with the government, physical possession remains legally fragile. A new, registered deed will almost always override a prior informal one. The lesson of this 14-year saga is clear. In property law, your presence on the land is temporary. Only the government's registered paper is permanent.